So the whole point of capitalism is to take whatever capital you have, or whatever capital investors have, and turn that into more capital. So because of that, corporations are driven by any means to make as much money as possible. That's the whole point. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their backers to make as much money as possible.
What do we have here? Another smug douchebag with a moderately large following that speaks like he knows better than anyone else, but all it takes to see that he doesn't know shit is to listen to him talk or to read writings about anything that he's talking about. The main hallmarks of what it takes to have me want to throw you into a vat of acid. I'm sure that this is gonna be fun. Let's start off by addressing the previous scene, shall we?
So the whole point of capitalism is to take whatever capital you have, or whatever capital investors have, and turn that into more capital.
No. There is no defined point of capitalism other than a mode for society to operate under, and that defined mode is private voluntary exchange where all decisions are determined by private individuals. This is because when private businesses utilize the regulations and state influence to profit and curb the market, they take away any incentive that they once had to actually provide to their customers quality service at a competitive price, or their workers with working conditions which are desirable to compete with other businesses by guaranteeing them an income, which effectively turns them into de facto arms of the government and not a product of free market enterprise, which is precisely why laissez-faire market advocates such as libertarians and anarchists want to get the government out of the market. If producers cut corners to save money or make products more expensive or inconvenience their customers and workers in any way, shape, or form, they will lose all of their business and their workers because customers actually want cheap quality products and the workers want the best wages they can get with the best benefits available. In a free market, competitors actually motivated by wanting to obtain profit will provide the same product and better working conditions to lure customers and workers to work for them and buy from them, which is why big corporations absolutely hate free markets and historically have always lobbied in favor of government regulation. In laissez-faire capitalism, a producer choosing to cut corners and fuck over their workers is the equivalent of just declaring bankruptcy on the spot.
And that doesn't matter if they violate somebody else or their property. So the reason that government regulation is important is because they can control all of the businesses in limited ways.
We need to stop giant unaccountable monopolies from forming in the free market and violating our rights, even though it's literally impossible for that to happen without regulatory capture. Therefore, let's put a giant unaccountable monopoly which can only function if it violates our rights and is motivated by the same thing that motivates the businesses under it in charge of the entire economy.
So I actually agree with some stances on libertarianism. I think that there are a lot of regulations that we don't need, that it slows progress down.
Yep, all of them. Regulations, by their very nature, make it more difficult for competing businesses to enter the economy because they artificially increase the cost of production, meaning that less people can actually compete. Corporatist businesses, which are subsidized by the state, can afford this since, well, they're subsidized by the state. But most entrepreneurs generally can't because they aren't subsidized by the state, which puts them out of business and only leaves you with a small handful of massive corporations and the government in a perpetual circle jerk where legislators create regulations, the corporations lobby for the government to regulate the industry, the government does so, and the new competition emerging dies because they can't afford to compete. And then morons like you see this corporation's expanding influence over the economy and demand more regulation in response. It's funny that people say laissez-faire capitalism is feudalism, but what anti-capitalists advocate for is literally just feudalism with extra steps. Just not even subtle about it. It's literally just feudalism.
It just makes things harder. There's a very clear way of deciding what regulations need to go and what regulations can stay.
Like what? They appeal to your ideology? You yourself already acknowledged that regulations are harmful for the economy. Either follow your argument to its logical conclusion and fuck your feelings to hell, or get out of the way and leave the economics to the people who understand that the economy will not be swayed by your feelings for how it should be versus how it actually is.
The whole point of the government is that because they are subject to the people directly through voting, they are to work in our best interest.
You have no choice but to be subjugated to their rule. Therefore, they cannot be your servant because they are your ruler. If they were your servant, they would be subject to your whim, and if that was the case, you would have the choice not to associate with them. Since you don't have that choice, no one who's logically consistent can claim that the government serves you. There is no agreement which any of us has ever signed that allows the government to do this to us, nor is there any way to withdraw consent. Therefore, the government rules over you. In the words of Senpai Philosopher, a man is no less a slave because he's allowed to choose a new master once in a term of years. If you know who that quote is from, you get a cookie.
So that means that they should only be putting regulations forward that are in our best interest.
There are no regulations in your best interest, you fucking moron!
So if you have regulations that are outright favoring corporations over people, or if the regulations bog down action too much to the point that it hurts people, those are the regulations we need to get rid of.
Right, so we agree that all regulations need to be gotten rid of. Gotcha.
New regulations should only be put in place if they are serving the best interests of the public. Okay, so that's where I stand. Now, let's get into the video proper.
Good God, this thing hasn't even started yet?
So in my opinion, libertarianism is really idiotic. It's based on a lot of really foolish beliefs. Number one, that the market somehow has magical self-regulating properties. The market can regulate itself without help from the government.
The market doesn't regulate, consumers do. People don't buy stuff they don't like.
So there are two problems here. The first is people's access to products. If you have a monopoly, that denies people access to any other form of that resource.
And you can't have a monopoly without regulatory capture, which requires government intervention in the market and is what you're advocating for. Your argument's just plain stupid. It's like somebody saying, well, books don't react well with fire because it burns, so I'll just make sure not to ignite matches on the cover of my book. Then you come along and say, but we need to spark matches on the book to prevent it from catching on fire.
If a company's big enough, they'll be able to muscle out any other competition.
How? How does a big company do anything to another company without regulatory capture?
Look at Walmart, for example. They move into towns and they decimate local businesses.
And of course, the example you provide of a free market monopoly is one of the worst examples of corporatism. A company which has subsidized $6 billion, which is nearly half of their net income after taxes. This is typical statist bullshit. Take a problem created by the government and then blame it on the market to advocate for more government control of the economy.
And also, if there just isn't any other option out there, your money doesn't matter, because it can only go to one place.
Yep, because a scenario where in a free market no one attempts to compete even though there's a direct incentive for them to do so and anyone can do it, but simply choose not to, is totally not a load of Acme, Wile E. Coyote cartoon logic bullshit. Do you have any idea how stupid that is? That's like saying, no one will work without a government forcing them to because people could just choose not to work.
Now the second problem is kind of in the same vein. I want you to look at this picture. You see how just these 10 companies own all of these products. Let's say all of these main shareholder companies all decide to just violate people's rights. Where the fuck else are you supposed to buy anything? These companies run almost all of these products. You have no other options of where to buy.
Yep, Corporatism feels bad, man.
How do you figure out which of these products agree with your ethics? So let's say you want to purchase some Tide, and then you find out they're doing something incredibly unethical. Now, you can't purchase anything else that is owned by this company.
First of all, in a free market, copyright does not exist. Therefore, one company does not own Tide. And again, anyone can enter the market to compete at any time. But this aside, who said that companies were above the law? Of course, people running companies in a libertarian society would be held criminally liable if they directly violated someone's rights. Just because there's no state does not mean there isn't a law. Also, this is a straw man to begin with, since the argument isn't that unethical consumerism can't exist. It can, just not systemically sustainable in a free market anarchy, since there's no arbiter propping them up. The people running that corporation would be criminal just like any other person who coerces someone else. The argument was that products won't artificially increase in price, nor will they go down in quality due to a company trying to cut corners without regulation. And the reason for this being the case is because of competition. Competition allows the market to self-regulate.
And I've asked them why they think this, and this is what they tell me. They say that if a corporation acts poorly, that the people will find out about it and the people will not buy their product. But in the real world we live in, that's simply not possible. People are stupid.
So let's have a government where we elect a small number of stupid people to protect us. That'll fix it.
Well, that's assuming that we only elect stupid people.
Dusty claims that everyone is stupid and therefore the markets can't self-regulate. Mr. Dapperton responds by pointing out how from that it's illogical to assume that putting a small number of people in charge of the economy is a good idea if everyone is too stupid to decide whether or not they want to buy a product. You respond with, "Well, you don't know everyone's stupid." How do you continue to exist being this fucking dumb? I won't even need to throw you in that tub of acid. Your dumb ass will probably just walk right in.
Touché. These are two totally different examples. In one, you're electing a small group of people who will listen to experts and help craft legislation that will be effective.
Oh, so people are too stupid to regulate the market for themselves, but as long as they agree with you on politics, they magically become competent enough to run the entire economy. Got it.
In the other example, once again, you have a small number of people, and you have absolutely no direct influence on who's in charge of those companies.
Yes, because when there's only one course of action a company can take to sustain a profit, and that one course of action simultaneously benefits anyone working for it and the consumers who purchase its products, it really matters who's in charge. But I find it even funnier that you just described the government to a T, and yet somehow you're attacking private companies.
People are dumb, ignorant, lazy-minded monkeys. They don't have time to sit around and research every product they buy before they buy it.
They don't have to. Other people could do it for them. That's how ratings and reviews work.
Okay, so let's put aside the fact that there would have to be researchers and reviewers to dig through that massive web that I already laid out in my first argument. Let's just assume that there are people who are capable of doing that.
Yeah, even right now, there are thousands of private reviewers who are literally paid to do that. How do you think you even found that web you presented?
How the fuck do you know who to trust? How do you know what reviews are actually reliable? How do you know what researchers actually have done the work? How do you know that those researchers haven't been bought off?
First of all, there are thousands of them competing with one another. People don't like false information and will therefore evaluate the different reviews, and people who give false information won't be profiting for long. But seriously, how dense are you to try and critique someone's economic views when you don't even understand something as simple as supply and demand?
We can already see how fake news is going rampant on social media, and without any regulations in place from stopping companies from doing this, how could you ever hope to control them?
Because it's not like all of these social media sites and media outlets spreading fake news are subsidized by the government too, right?
Nobody does this. And that's evident if you just look at companies like BP. How much oil did BP dump into our oceans?
If only they were regulated. Oh wait, they were. But no, we need more, and that would magically change things.
I don't know why adding another regulation on top is the immediate go-to answer. It depends on the situation. In this case it happened because regulators weren't doing their job on site. So the first thing we should do is make sure the regulations that we have in place are being applied correctly.
From the people who brought you the no true socialism fallacy. Now, it's the no true regulations fallacy. Honestly, this level of pseudo-intellectualism is below me, and at this point, I'm only continuing because this guy amuses me. Sure, just completely ignore the fact that this isn't how regulations on an oil rig work, because, much like every worksite, there's not a fucking government official who is constantly there, let alone a worksite which is in the middle of the goddamn ocean. And these regulations were structural ones on the oil rig, which BP followed.
And I mean, yes, if there is an area that's being worked around and that isn't getting the proper amount of attention, you put another regulation in place.
And Mr. Dapperton's argument was that this is exactly what we've been doing, and yet these problems still happen. So it's clear to me that you have missed the entire point.
Now, if you want to go back and look at how things were before regulations existed, go back just after the Industrial Revolution. Back then, companies destroyed the environment. They poisoned everybody in surrounding communities. They also kept people in about slave-like condition, that they paid them almost no money, they hired children, and it was extremely dangerous. People were maimed all of the time. The free market wasn't what stopped that. It was regulations that stopped it, to once again protect people's interests.
This is either ignorance from a lack of knowledge of economics or dishonesty. Really, with this guy, it could be either one. Firstly, as noted, wages and the quality of products increased as a result of market competition. This is why Ford, for instance, was paying his factory workers at $30 an hour and had them working 8-hour work shifts decades before the major labor movements began to affect government policy. The reason pollution went down, child labor was eliminated from the workforce, and working conditions improved was due to innovation making machinery safer to operate, eliminating the market's need for child labor, also a big part of the reason why the time required to work went down, and making machinery which didn't require as much output. This is the reason all of these things were also absent from the workforce by the time that all of the major labor movements came around. And while it's certainly true that there were less regulations in the U.S. at the time, it was not a free market, as there were still economic regulations in place.
Giant corporations like BP who pollute wouldn't exist without the legal protections afforded to them by the government.
And furthermore, whoa, do you hear that? What the fuck is that sound? Oh my god, it's getting louder. Ah, oh my god!
Under real capitalism, their business would be subject under the free market and would fail because of what they do to the environment. So I'm smart enough to vote in a ruler who gets to selfishly make all the rules and sell us out to the corporations and allow corporations to keep out competitions, but I'm not smart enough to choose my own deodorant and decide which deodorant company should be around and which one shouldn't. Makes sense.
So when that oil spill happened, BP lost 55% of its market value. Wasn't that the free market acting on it? Yet somehow, we weren't able to put them out of business?
Losing 55% of your company's market value, even when you're one of the worst examples of corporatism, that's a huge fucking deal. And yeah, if they weren't subsidized or protected by the state, they almost certainly would have gone out of business over that one.
So then what was the magic governmental thing that kept them afloat after losing 55% of their market value? I mean, you could totally win me over. If we managed to totally put them out of business back when it happened, yeah, I would agree with you.
Alright, now you're just shifting the goalpost to arbitrarily exclude an example which proves you wrong. They lost 55% of their market value, but they didn't get put out of business. Consumer choice debunked. Yeah, I don't know who you think you're fooling, but anyone with an IQ over 50 is not buying it.
That in this one case, the market was able to regulate itself. But I can't find any evidence that the US government helped them. In fact, we fined them over $1 billion. So how exactly is fining them money, in addition to their market loss, helping them?
And they had the highest profit margins they've ever had.
Maybe because a lot of people are idiots like you and rely on the government to fix the problem. Something that'll totally happen. 80,001 pages wasn't enough? Damn it, try 80,002 pages. I swear that'll work.
What exactly is stopping you from implementing this vote with our wallet thing?
Gee, I don't know. What's stopping the market from regulating itself? It can't possibly be all these subsidies and regulations, which the market progressively gets worse as more and more of them are added onto the economy.
You should be able to do that right now.
Well, as you've shown, it does happen, but it doesn't actually affect anything, or at least on the scale that it should, because all of the subsidizing and regulations that our government puts on the market. Yeah, it's kinda getting boring repeating the same thing over and over. Let's skip forward a bit to see if he actually says something different.
The market does not regulate itself. It cannot regulate itself.
Because undesirable companies stick around forever. That's why Blockbusters and Borders sit on every street.
Borders and Blockbuster didn't go out of business because of something that they did that offended other people.
No, they went out of business because they didn't innovate with the competition, and therefore the competition killed them.
What the fuck? You just invalidated your own argument. I thought apparently the government was somehow magically keeping businesses in place. But apparently not Blockbuster or Borders.
Well, if absolutely no one is going to your store anymore, it's difficult to keep your lights on even with government subsidies and regulatory capture. You know, for someone who recognizes nuance, or supposedly does, you sure seem to selectively apply it only when it conveniences you.
The truth is, if you're paying attention at all, people are terrible, selfish assholes who would do whatever they can to get over their fellow man, even a little bit.
That's why we take a small group of them, call them government, and give them power to violate other people's person or property at will. Duh.
How's that different under your system?
Because no one has political authority, market competitors are actually subject to competition, no one is coerced into anything, and the quality of life greatly improves due to the increased rate of innovation created by a hyper-competitive market. Oh, and refer to my earlier points about regulations and subsidies. So we're halfway through the video, and I've literally debunked every point that he's made and is going to make. Yeah, rational disconnect. Your channel name fits your content, buddy. Alright, well that's it for today's video. If you liked it, then please comment, rate, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.